Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madison and this is Madiswan Reads. So today I'm going to be coming to you with a big book unhaul. I am surrounded on all sides by stacks of books. I just recently did a lot of book shopping, so I've added quite a few to my collection, and I thought that it would be only fair to kind of go through my shelves, see if there was anything that I could get rid of. So as far as donating, I'm going to be taking these to my local half-price books, so hopefully they can find a loving home with someone who will really enjoy them. And just as a quick little disclaimer before I get started, these books were all ones that I've either enjoyed at one point or another and have grown out of, or books that I just haven't really gotten to and don't see myself getting to in the future. So if your favorite book is in this unhaul, definitely don't take it personally. I really enjoyed some of these books. They just don't really have a space on my shelves anymore, and it is certainly not anything against you personally if I didn't like your favorite book or anything like that. Alright, so we are going to start off this book unhaul pretty strongly with something that may be a little controversial in the grand scheme of things, and that is the Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer. Perhaps you can't see them because my arm is in the way. Let me try to adjust. Yes, so we're going to be starting with the Twilight series by Stephenie Meyer. I have read all of these. I collected them a few years ago through various Goodwills. And now that I'm thinking back to it, I don't really know why I felt the need to connect them. I read them, I enjoyed them, but I never was really part of like the Twilight series hype. I've never seen the movies, which is also a little bit controversial. But yeah, I'm not really sure why these are still sitting on my shelves. And because I know there are so many fans that do love this series so strongly, I just wanted to give someone else a chance to find the whole collection and really enjoy it. So that's why I'm passing these along. And then the next book that I have here is actually The Giver by Lois Lowry. I read this a while ago, probably when I was in junior high, maybe like 13, 14. I honestly don't remember much of the plot, and I've kept it on my shelves for years, but I don't ever see myself revisiting it. And I know that this is a very popular middle grade, maybe YA, dystopian book, and I just like the idea of someone else being able to discover the story. I wouldn't want to sort of keep it all to myself, so that's why I'm going to be getting rid of this one. Then the next book that I have on my list is If I Stay by Gail Forman. I was obsessed with this book when I was younger, and the accompanying movie. As you can tell, it's a little battered, it's a little rough. But again, pretty much like most of these, I just don't see myself revisiting this. I think I've kind of outgrown the sort of YA contemporary genre. Not to say that I won't revisit it at some points with new reads or anything like that. Again, I just really like the idea of someone being able to pick this up and enjoy it in the same way that I was able to. The next book that I have was actually a purchase that I made this past spring semester for my university. I took a true crime seminar as part of my English degree, and it was absolutely the coolest university class I've ever taken. But some of the books weren't exactly up my alley, and one of those is Black Edge by Sheila Kolotkar. And this book basically follows like a financial crime and the world of like crime in the stock market and insider trading. And while it was well written and it was interesting, just the world of finance isn't really my jam. I couldn't really connect to the story because there were just like a lot of confusing terms, a lot of things that I couldn't really wrap my head around in the story. So while it was overall interesting, I don't really see myself coming back to this. And yeah, maybe someone out there is interested in financial crime and might be happy to pick this up. For the next book, we are once again returning to the world of YA contemporary with 13 Reasons Why by J. Asher. This is another one where I really loved this book when I was younger, when I first started high school. I remember I read this all the time. And then the series came out and I watched the first season, and it kind of, I don't want to say ruined, but it definitely dampened my experience of the book. I didn't necessarily think that this book needed a series. I didn't think that this was something that needed to be explored super graphically, and in a way that I feel a lot of people have found super triggering since the series has been out. So I'll just give someone else an opportunity to read this. I don't see myself revisiting the story, and I think that just my love for it has kind of diminished over the years. This next book was actually one of my favorites when I first started high school. I just remember being obsessed with this book and this series. I thought that it was so intense and so good, and that is No Safety in Numbers by Dana Lawrence. And basically this book is set in a mall where there is this disease going around, and it's thought to be biological warfare. So the mall is sort of quarantined off, and we're following the different perspectives of like 5 kids, I think, who are just trying to figure out a way to get out. And this was like one of my favorite books at the time, but I think I've kind of moved past like this sort of story. It's not really the thing I like to read anymore, like a sort of biological thriller, and a YA biological thriller at that. I just don't really see myself coming back to this, so I'd love to give someone else the chance to explore it and maybe fall in love with it like I did. So these next 2 books were some that I purchased during like the peak of my Percy Jackson childhood. So like when I was 11, 12, these books were the epitome of everything that I loved in literature. And that is The Ultimate Guide to Percy Jackson and The Ultimate Guide to the Kane Chronicles. And as you can see by these books, I was in deep. They have like fun little cards in them. They're basically just a guide to like every character, every god. They have these super cool illustrations inside, and I just loved these so much. I thought they were so beautiful when I was younger, but today I'm really only in Percy Jackson for the story, and I don't see myself needing to hoard these from another person who could potentially love the series and just want to explore it more through these. So for that reason, I'm going to pass them along and hopefully give someone else a chance to fall in love with them like I did. This next book was yet another university read from actually my freshman year of college. I took a seminar called Fantasy Fiction, which was everything that I wanted in a class. It was so amazing. And this was one of the reads for that class, and this is The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. I actually really enjoyed this story a lot more than I thought I was going to, but I just, again, like I've been saying, I just don't really see myself coming back to it again, and I would really like to give some other fantasy lover the chance to explore it because it is a really good story. There are a lot more fantasy books that I'd like to read, probably too many fantasy books that I'd like to read, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pass this along. Alright, and then this next book is actually a sequel to one that I mentioned earlier. So this is No Dawn Without Darkness by Dana Lawrence. This is a sequel to No Safety in Numbers. This is actually the 3rd book. I have no idea how I ended up with the 3rd book rather than the 2nd. So I have the 1st and the 3rd, but as I said, same reasons that I'm passing along the 1st book. I really loved it at the time, but I think I've just kind of moved past the need for this sort of story in my life, and I'd love to give someone else the chance to find it and pick it up. So next up, we actually have Hex Hall and Demon Glass by Rachel Hawkins. I believe that these are the beginnings of a series. This is the 1st book, and this is the 2nd. And this is pretty much the same story as I've been telling with the rest of the books. I really loved these when I was younger, when I was just beginning my teens. They were such awesome fantasy stories set in a boarding school, which was like my favorite sort of setting. Magical school, I was all over it at the time. But I've had these on my shelves for a very long time, trying to convince myself that I'm going to reread them, and I just haven't done it yet, and I don't really see myself picking up the rest of the series, so I just want to give someone else an opportunity to find these. All right, so the next book that I have is, again, one that I fell in love with when I was younger, and it is a very popular YA contemporary romance, and that is Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. Same old story. I adored this book. When I was in middle school and going into high school, I loved it. I loved the movie adaptation. I love Nick Robinson. He's one of my faves. But I think that I've just moved past the need for this story. I've moved into more adult romances. So I'd love to pass this along to someone who shares the same enthusiasm for a good romance that I did. All right, and these next two books are actually keeping up with this weird theme that I have of just having sequel books and not the first. I don't know how this keeps happening to me, but it does. And that is the second and third book in the 13th Reality series by James Dashner. So we have The Hunt for Dark Infinity and The Blade of Shattered Hope. I do not remember the plot of these, but I do remember that I had such a strong adoration for these when I was in middle school. These were like top tier literature for me, but I could not tell you a facet of the plot anymore. Apparently the main character is named Tick, which is interesting. But yeah, I don't see myself coming back to them again, and I don't even have the first book, sadly. Maybe I might find the urge to pick these up again, but in that case I'll either get them from my local library or get them from the Libby app on my phone. So I just want to pass these along to someone who may love them as much as I did when I was younger. Next up, we have another series, and that is Alice in Zombieland by Jenna Showalter. I have the first 4 books. I'm not sure if there's any more. I kind of fell off with this series as I got older, but I did absolutely love this one. It's a super cool Alice in Wonderland retelling featuring, you guessed it, zombies. I remember it was like super intense and actually really devastating at some points. However, once again, we have the same story. I don't see myself coming back to it, and I'd love to give someone else the chance to explore this wonderful world because I really do remember loving this book and thinking that it was absolutely amazing. Next up, we have yet another series that I was absolutely in love with when I began high school. This was like the height of my YA fantasy phase when I just got my hands on anything and everything fantasy that I could, and I was especially into like retellings, as you can see with the Alice in Zombieland series, and then with this one, which is the Dorothy Must Die series by Danielle Page. Pretty much the same tale. I absolutely loved these. I was so obsessed with them and collecting them, but I really don't remember the story anymore, and I just don't see myself picking them back up, and I'd love to give someone the opportunity to find like the full set of them like this. I absolutely love the idea of that, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pass these along. Alright folks, we are entering the final stack and the final stretch of this book on haul, and we are gonna kick it off with The Longest Ride by Nicholas Sparks. I adored this book. Like my junior year of high school, I had such a Nicholas Sparks phase. I would just read Nicholas Sparks and sob, and those were my hobbies, like my junior year of high school when I was 16. So I really did love this book. However, I don't love this copy. This is like the movie cover, and it's also just mass market paperback, so it's super tiny, and I don't really like the readability of it. So if I ever do feel myself gravitating back to this story, I'll probably pick it up from the library or buy another copy with a different cover, because I have reached that point in my life where I'm a little bit of a cover snob, and I hate to admit that, but I do love a pretty cover. So yeah, I just thought I'd pass that along so someone else could discover it, and I'll buy a new copy if I ever feel the need to, or just pick it back up at the library. Next up, we have possibly my most hated book of all time. I don't know if that's a tad dramatic to say, but I read this my junior year of high school in one of my English classes, and I absolutely detested it. Now, to be fair, I haven't revisited it since then. It's been about 4 years. So my opinions on this book could have totally changed. And that is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I just could not connect with this story. I love the idea of it. I think that the premise is really great. But there were just so many just large words and run-on descriptions and things that I just did not need in this book. And you know, it could be just the language of classic literature that I'm struggling with, but I do have some of my favorite books that are classics, so I think I just didn't really connect with this one. And once again, same story as with The Longest Ride. I don't love the cover, and I don't love the size of it and the readability. It is, however, filled with like all of my annotations. We actually had to go through and underline words that we didn't know the meaning of. So I have done that a lot in this copy because there were a lot of words that I did not know. But once again, I'm just going to go ahead and pass this along because I don't really feel the need to hold on to it. Alright, so the next book that I have is yet another high school read, and I kind of have the same issues with it that I did with The Scarlet Letter in terms of just like the copy that it is. I don't love the cover, I don't love the font size or the size of the book itself. It kind of detracts from the reading experience for me, and that is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Now, I will admit, the first time that I read this, it did go pretty much the same way that The Scarlet Letter did. I did not like it at all. I had trouble getting through it. I had trouble understanding it and just muddling through like all of the descriptions, and just like the deep ideas that were in it. I just really grappled with them and had trouble understanding them. But then the second time that I read it in high school, I had a much easier time with it because I sort of knew the path that the story was taking. I could pay attention to some of the bigger ideas because I knew what was going on in the plot and I wasn't as confused. That being said, I don't really know that I need to own a copy of it. It's not one of my all-time favorite classics, and it's not something that I really see myself revisiting again, so I'm just going to pass this along for someone who may enjoy it more. Alright, and then the next book that I have is Tales of Greek Heroes by Roger Lansling Green. And once again, I picked this up in the height of my Percy Jackson phase, and I really adored it at the time. I really liked it. However, I think that if I were to pick up more Greek mythology in the future, I would probably reach for a more comprehensive collection, and not just stories of Greek heroes. So for that reason, I'm going to pass this along to someone else who might enjoy it. So the next book that I have is Nerve by Jean Ryan. And I absolutely loved this book when I read it the first time. I probably read it when I was like 15, and it was so gripping and so intense, but it's just it's just sat on my shelves for a very long time, and I've never reached for it again. I haven't really thought about it. So I think that I'll just pass this along to someone who might love it more. I actually think that I might give this to my sister. I think that she would really enjoy this story. She's actually visiting from Japan, so I think that she would really enjoy this. So next up, we have another addition to the sort of YA collection that I formed in my middle school / preteen years, and that is Ashfall by Mike Mullen. And at the time, as you've heard about many of these books, I was absolutely obsessed with this story. It basically discusses what would happen if the supervolcano under Yellowstone National Park erupted, and I remember that this was my greatest fear when I was in like 6th grade and 7th grade. In school, we had to watch that movie. I think it was called like Supervolcano, and it was about what would happen if the Yellowstone supervolcano erupted. And I was absolutely terrified that this was going to happen. Like, it was one of my biggest fears at the time that the volcano would erupt, and just like disaster would ensue. So this book kind of explored that for me, and probably fed that fear more than it helped to assuage it. However, this book was so good. It was incredibly gripping, but I just looked it up the other day, and I think there are like 3 or 4 more installments, and I just don't really see myself following along with the rest of the series, but I would love to pass this along to someone who might love it as much as I did, and who possibly has the same weird obsession with the Yellowstone supervolcano. Okay, so this next book is actually a sequel to a very beloved adult romance of mine, and that is After You by Jojo Moyes. I read Me Before You a few years ago. I sobbed, I screamed, I cried so much. I absolutely loved it, and so I picked up the sequel. However, I just let this sit on my shelf for years and years, and I've never really felt the need to read it. I've never really felt the need for the Me Before You story to sort of continue. I've never felt interested in what happens after the end of the book. I thought that Me Before You was a great standalone. It's a really good self-contained story, so I've just never really felt compelled to pick this up, and I would love to donate it to someone who might feel that compulsion and who might really love the series as a whole. Next, I have 2 adult contemporaries that have once again been sitting on my shelves for a while, and I've just never picked them up. And that is the Bueno series Broken Hearts Club by Jessica Morrison, and then The Cinderella Pact by Sarah Strohmeyer. And I honestly don't even know really what these 2 books are about. I've had them for the longest time. I think I might have gotten them from Goodwill. I think they were both kind of like cover buys because they're super pretty, but I've never felt the need to read them, and I just don't see myself picking them up in the near future. I have a lot of other books that I would prefer to get to first, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pass those along to someone who might love them more. Okay, friends, we have reached the final book in this big unhaul, and that is Spelled by Betsy Shao. So this follows along with the theme of my obsession with retellings when I was in middle school. This is a Wizard of Oz retelling, as you can clearly see, and I loved it at the time, but like many of these books, I've never gravitated back towards it, and I think I've sort of moved out of this phase in my life as a reader, and I would just really like to give this to someone who is perhaps going through the same Wizard of Oz retelling phase as I did. So with that, we have reached the end of this book haul. Thank you all so much for sticking with me through all of the times that I said I would love to pass this along and I was obsessed with this book, but I'm not anymore. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I am going to take all of these and pass them along to Half Price Books, where hopefully someone can find them and love them as I have. I'm super excited to have created some new space on my shelves, which was much needed. So if you liked this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. Drop your comments if you've read any of these books, if you love any of them, if they're possibly any of your favorites, or just drop a comment, let me know what you're reading right now. And once again, thank you all so much for being here over at Madiswan Reads, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!